What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Grind City Media Studios, the Built for Tough studio here in Memphis. You're watching A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers, the podcast, and it's based on the book that Russ Bankston wrote. I'm Lang Whitaker. He's Russ Bankston. Russ just wrote this book, A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers, and we are working our way through the history and the sneakers, and we are on Chapter 7. And Russ, I don't know if it gets any better than this chapter.
I don't know how we're going to limit this to
20 minutes
to a day. I mean, the Air Jordan 1 is like a turning point of everything.
Humanity?
Possibly humanity.
Yeah.
Nike, sneakers.
Changed the world.
Jordan, right? Us.
I've got one here. This is actually a Jordan 1.5 or something like that.
No, it's a Jordan 1. I mean, it's not
a full, yeah. It's
like, that's like a constantly argued thing, but Jordan, the ones he wore were basically mids anyway.
This one was given to us. Russ and I when we worked at Slam Magazine, went to a sneaker event and for the launch of the Jordan 23, I think, and they gave us a pair of these ones with
Chicago.
Michael's signature. You can see on the collar there, like signature lasered into it up there. And I am of the opinion that you wear your shoes, and maybe I should have saved them like you did and had the other one.
Although I wore mine at least a few times.
Yeah.
But when I did a sneaker show called Quick Strike, when I was at Complex, Spike Lee was a guest, and I ended up having him sign the other inner ankle. So I need to befriend someone at Nike who does the lasering, so I can get Spike's signature lasered in.
Now you can get it lasered anywhere. They have
do they do that?
3D printers and crap. Like you can do this stuff at home. I think.
So, I don't know. I don't have a laser at my house.
I mean, sure you do. I think nowadays though it's so much easier to do. But anyway, we're going to talk about the Jordan 1, and this came out 84, 85, something like that.
84.
Yeah, Michael Jordan, a rookie in the NBA, coming from Carolina. Coming from Carolina and the Olympics, and coming off those two things, even though he's not the first pick in the draft, people are already thinking, all right, this guy's going to be special. I mean, look, there's literally like movies made about this
literal movies.
This shoe coming to life.
Yeah.
As someone who's been a fan, like I know Michael's your favorite, the Bulls were your team, Jordan's your favorite player, and all this forever. Was there anything you came across researching this chapter you didn't know?
I mean, a lot of it was kind of, I knew all the pieces and it's kind of how they fit together. You know, it's like, and it is funny how quickly it all came together. I mean, between them signing him and then getting the shoe on him. And I think when the Bulls picked him, back then it certainly was kind of like there was that overarching you can't teach size kind of thing. Olajuwon was always going to be the number one, and then
Sam Bowie.
Obviously Portland was sort of unsure because they already had Clyde Drexler, they had Jim Paxson. It seems kind of silly.
That's sort of like the Pistons not taking Carmelo because they were like, oh well, we already have Rip Hamilton and Tayshaun.
Yeah, at some point you don't pick for need, like when you have someone like that on the table. And I think even in that time between him getting drafted and then playing in the Olympics, I think somewhere along the line, Portland had to be like, we've made a huge mistake.
I'm sure they thought about that on draft night because Sam Bowie was injured at Kentucky a lot.
Yeah, and it became pretty clear. I mean, the Olympic team playing against NBA players, and Jordan was still probably the best player on the floor. Like, certainly in the Olympics, it was absurd. Like, he's literally head and shoulders above everyone. And by the time he joins the Bulls, the Bulls had really not much going for them. They had Quentin Daly, they had Orlando Woolridge, they had what did Jordan call it? The flying cocaine circus? I remember back when Tony and I did a piece for Slam, for one of those Jordan special issues, we asked him.
Shout out Tony Gervina.
We asked him, Jordan, what he learned from those guys, and he's like, to not be like them.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, I mean, that's pretty harsh, first of all. Second of all, it's actually pretty
smart,
mature coming from a rookie.
Yeah.
He knew he didn't want that.
Yeah.
And that first year, it's like he's on the cover of Sports Illustrated, obviously rookie of the year. they made it back to the playoffs, even though that year they got swept.
Yeah.
Like they didn't really do much. But it's like even Nike kind of didn't know. You know, there's a quote in there that I got that David Fox told me, like that basically nobody realized he'd be that good.
Yeah. Well, look, that's got to be true. I mean, even like LeBron, when he came out of high school as the most heralded player since Jordan and goes to the NBA, like everyone knew LeBron was going to be good. Like, but I don't think any of us knew he was going to be this good, right? And with Jordan, like, how would anyone know Michael Jordan was going to be the best player of all time? To me, he's the greatest player of all time. I always say that. But I like, how did anybody know? Like, no one could have thought that would.
But I think you also look at it as like, you know, red and black has become this iconic thing, and certainly with sneakers in general, and there's so much like that. But you go back to then, and it's like you have the Bulls who are bad.
Yeah.
And you're going to put this entire brand basically on this rookie's back. Yeah. And do everything in Bulls colors.
Yeah.
When the NBA even is still kind of like, it's just, you know, it's Larry and Mike and Magic. And it's funny because they had an out in Jordan's deal. If he didn't sell a certain amount of product in the first 3 years, they could have dropped him for the last 2, which was like a piddling amount. It's in there, but like, you know, $5 million over 3 years.
Yeah.
And Air Jordan sells $126 million worth of product in the first year.
Yeah. And according to you, the all Converse sneakers that year sold 175 million.
That was in the first, I think that was the first like 3 quarters of the year. That was the only numbers I could find. But like, I mean, Air Jordan blew up everything. And I think like you had people who wouldn't have even considered buying a basketball shoe. Yeah. Who got sucked into Air Jordan.
Yeah. And before we get to that, though, like, let's talk a little bit about how Michael ended up at Jordan/Nike.
Right.
Because like you talked to David Falk, his agent, in the book, and like Mike liked Adidas more, and who was it? Spot Build offered him a whole bunch of money too.
Spot Build offered more money, which is crazy to me. Like, I don't know where they pulled that off.
That could have been one of the greatest investments.
It was like
all
their football money.
Because at the time, who wore Spot Build? I remember Xavier McDaniel wore those. At some point.
I mean, there were some guys like even like Reggie Miller ended up later on. Like he wore them. I think his first year
at some point.
Hakeem was a tonic.
That's right.
But I mean, Spot Build would have been like cleats. You know, like. But
it became Saucony, right? Like, that's the same logo.
But I think you had had 2 sort of groups working on him. Yeah. Like, and you had David Falk working to sell Nike to Jordan. Yeah. Rather than him going with the brand he really wanted. Yeah. And you had Sonny Vaccaro on the other side selling Jordan to Nike. Yeah. And like, he was player of the year. Like he was obviously a big deal at North Carolina, but he was still playing in Dean Smith's system. Like, he would get the breakaway, like whatever dunk where, sweep around like at the end of games and stuff. But, there's that old joke about who could hold Michael Jordan under 20 points a game, and it was Dean Smith. Yeah. Still playing in the 4 corners or whatever else. So it wasn't readily apparent that this guy's going to come out and average 30 points a game in the NBA. And Nike was kind of spread thin. Like Air Force One led into other things. They had a ton of players under contract. Yeah. And it's like, okay, what are these guys doing for us? Yeah. So I think, on Sonny's end, he had to be the one to tell Nike, to tell Phil Knight, to tell Rob Strasser, to tell Peter Moore, no, this is the guy. Yeah. And I think on Falk's end, he's the one who had to convince Jordan and Dolores, his mom, and James, his dad, like, no, this company is the one who's going to do these things for you. Yeah. I think maybe they could have gotten an Adidas deal. They could have gotten a Converse deal. Yeah. But he would have been a guy. It would have just been like, here's your new, up and coming rookie to market. But Nike was the one who was going to build this brand around him. Yeah, his own. They gave brand. Him everything.
Eventually, it becomes a company.
Yeah, right. I mean, it wasn't its own company at first, but if you look at Air Jordan 1 And like they did so many colors that first year.
Yeah.
They did all the suits. They did shirts.
Look at the shoe. Like, I mean, he had his own several logos. Like this one has the wing basketball on the side there, and then on the back of the shoe there's the Jumpman, which sort of became synonymous with it.
Right, and the Jumpman was the logo they did from a shoot of him wearing that shoe.
Yeah.
And like, there's a whole backstory about that too, with some shoot with him or Life magazine.
That's supposedly a copy of it.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, the Jumpman pose is way more iconic than the New Balance one. Because like just the way his arm is and parallel to the I don't know, like everything about it. And it was in front of the Chicago skyline originally.
Yeah. There was the poster of it, the Nike poster.
It was the poster. It became the hang tag.
Yeah.
And the story is Peter Moore left a tracing of it for Tinker Hatfield, who ended up taking over the Jordan line, and it became the Jumpman on the Jordan 3 and became like a big part of that marketing push. But Air Jordan 1, like also because it sold so many, and there's a story I think it's in Swoosh, which Rob Strasser's widow wrote about the early days of Nike. Like supposedly they put up like bus stop ads in New York City, and like 75 of them got stolen. Like people broke in to take them. Like it just became this phenomenon so fast. And then they produced more because everyone wanted more, but they went a little overboard.
Yeah.
So the Jordan 1 stayed available for years.
Yeah.
And it eventually got priced like way down. So
like
so many people had them and wore them. Like even if they bought them cheap, like you would still see them. Like Powell Peralta, Tony Hawk, like the Bones Brigade, that skate, they all wore them when they were like kind of off Vans. Because it was cheap and it was available.
I also wonder if that's why the 2 never really caught on at the time, because the 1s were still selling. Like you could still get 1s, by the time the 2s came. And the 2s also just looked completely different.
The 2 was like super adventurous. It took them a while to figure out how to make it. They made them in Italy.
Fancy materials and all that. Yeah.
Fancy materials, higher price point, no swoosh.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, what is this?
Yeah.
And it's funny to me, like, I mean, I'm an unabashed fan of the 2, but I feel like the 3 gets a lot of credit for things that the 2 started.
Yeah.
As far as like not having a swoosh, using exotic like fake skins and like being this completely different shoe.
As far as like technically with this shoe, like, you talked about it in a previous podcast, but like you said, like they had to like make a very minimal airbag to put in there. It's very low to the ground. I mean, it's very different than the Air Force One, which was their biggest shoe probably right before that.
Well, it's funny. Like you look at the Air Force One, you look at even some of the other shoes Nike made before that, and guys would wear those for like weeks at a time, if not like full seasons. Like shoes by the end of the year would be a nightmare. Yeah. And Jordan is kind of the one who ushered in that idea of like wearing a new pair of shoes every game.
Yeah.
And I think there's a psychological aspect behind that where it's like you want that feeling of lacing up a new pair, because everyone who's laced up a new pair of sneakers knows like that's like that's awesome. And if it's your own shoe, that's even better. But at the same time, like that way you can kind of make them pre-broken in almost, or like you can make the padding that much thinner because it only has to last 48 minutes. Yeah. So like you can do sort of a, it's weird to say with an 80s shoe, but it is almost a minimalist kind of thing compared to like the Air Force One.
And also, but the other thing like the Air Force One is just the construction of the shoe is such that it's so customizable, and like now you see it with the 18 million different colorways of the shoe that have come out since 1980.
But initially it jumped, right? I mean, you had like, especially like the black and red, the colorway got banned because it wasn't
51% white.
As David Letterman made the joke, it didn't have enough white in it. Neither did the NBA. But like it would jump off the shelf at a store, like where, black and red or black and royal or even the white, black, red. Like back then, so many shoes were just a white high top that had branding on the side. Yeah. They all essentially looked the same. So this was like extremely different compared to that. Yeah. And then when they did ban the shoe, and it's it's interesting because he only wore black and red. It was an airship.
Yeah.
I think like it came up later. Aaron Goodwin somehow had a pair.
Huh.
And I think I forget whether he sold them or just posted them to show people.
Aaron Goodwin's an agent in the NBA for a bunch of guys now, Damian Lillard and a bunch of guys.
But it was an airship with kind of what became that Jordan 1 sole unit.
Yeah.
Actually, no, the black and red ones had a different sole unit. But regardless, it was a modified airship that said Air Jordan on it.
Yeah.
That colorway got banned. So they came out with this red, black, and white, which is what he wore predominantly in the NBA.
Yeah.
The only time he wore black and red was in the dunk contest.
Yeah. And then he broke them out again later in '98. We have a picture of him when he was retiring the second time, or so, I don't know which time it was, but
second time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he wore them at Madison Square Garden. But so many of these shoes, like,
I like that someone's running through the front of that frame. It's probably like Chris Dudley or
somebody
something.
getting out of the way. Somebody going for a rebound.
But yeah, I mean, the story is Jordan found a pair of those in the back of his closet from 1985 and was like, I got to wear these for like potentially for my last regular season game in Madison Square Garden. And again, Tony Gervino and I were doing like either a Jordan special issue or Kicks. I forget which one it was, but we were in Portland.
Yeah.
And I knew that game was happening, and I was bummed to be missing Jordan at the Garden. We turned that game on in the hotel, and I see him wearing Jordan 1s, and like, I don't think I fell on the floor, but I almost did. Like, like, how am I missing this? And apparently his feet got bloody, like, because they were a size or a half size too small. It's kind of funny to think of now because, you know, in 1998, those shoes were 13 years old.
Yeah.
And you think now if someone wears a pair of 13-year-old shoes in the NBA, that's from, what, 2010?
Yeah.
You wouldn't even notice.
Yeah. I wonder also, like, how, like, you know, like when you put a pair of shoes in your attic for 13 years and they crack and they turn yellow and all this stuff.
I mean, these were in Michael Jordan's house, which is probably, like, ridiculously climate controlled. He's probably in a humidor with his cigars.
We're running out of time, but the other shoe you mentioned in this chapter, and I thought we should at least talk about it at some point on this podcast, is the Converse Weapon, which was like, I remember, like, I had a pair of the Bird Converse Weapons when I was a kid, the black and white. I remember the commercial on TV, which was them rapping, and, you know,
the rapping commercial is one of the most amazing things ever.
Yeah. But it's all the different guys taking their turns and talking about how cool the shoe is and all these things. But it's funny because, like, you know, if the Jordan 1 doesn't exist, the Converse Weapon is probably the shoe we remember from that time period, just culturally and consider who wore it, like Bird, Magic, all those guys.
Right.
But in context against the Jordan 1, it's kind of like...
I mean, the thing is, like, you know, the Weapon kind of gave Converse more of that semi-signature. I mean, that sort of fits into the top 10 Air Force One with multiple guys wearing it. Although... higher level guys, obviously, with Magic and Bird.
Two of the best,
Yeah, and Bernard, who had a 60-point game, and Aguirre, Isaiah.
And McHale had won, like, 6th Man of the Year. And,
right. But, you know, I don't know if Converse does those team colors like that without Air Jordan 1.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Weapon, too, it still has that straight across cut. Like, it's still, like...
It's really, like, puffy around the ankles too.
Yeah. I mean, it's still like kind of an early 80s shoe.
Yeah.
That released in 86.
Yeah. It felt like wearing a ski boot. I remember, like, I had a pair and they weren't, like, very comfortable and fun to wear.
I mean, some of the colors were good. Like the Magic one was awesome. The Lakers one. It's kind of funny. Like, this is sort of an aside to that, but I ended up looking at, like, I found a bunch of different auctions of game worn shoes that Magic had worn.
Yeah.
And almost all of his shoes, including the Weapon, like the first shoe he wore coming out of Michigan State was, I think, the Pro Leather.
Yeah.
Which is the super basic.
Yeah.
The one Michael Jordan wore at Carolina. Yeah. But every shoe Magic got after that was basically like a, what's that called? I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's Trompe L'Oeil. Is that the painting?
Trompe L'Oeil.
It looks real, but but that's all his were. Like, it looked like whatever the current shoe was, but basically built on that Pro Leather, like no technology sole unit, even all the way through, like, towards the end of his career.
That was the way Magic played, just on the ground, really. You know, like even he did like the slowest 360s of all time when he would drive and stuff. Like he wasn't it was almost like a robot that was programmed to play basketball. You know what I mean? Like he was incredible.
Yeah.
But the thing about Jordan that made him so spectacular was it was so improvisational and so like unlike anything we'd ever seen before, I think. Right. And, like every game he does things I say this about Ja a lot, like being here and seeing Ja Morant play. Like you and I have watched a lot of basketball.
Yeah.
Every game, Ja Morant does something I've never seen before.
Yes.
And you could say that about Jordan too, like, to probably an even greater degree, because the way Jordan played was so revolutionary. And I think you could say that the Air Jordan 1 was the same thing sort of to the sneaker world.
Yeah. I mean, I think it added even an extra sort of bit of flash to something that was already insane.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think Ja is similar to that, and he's doing things because he has to.
Yeah.
I think Jordan kind of did the same thing. Like he wasn't doing things.
Yeah. There was no need for Jordan to do the pump fake layup. Like when he jumps in the air, pulls it back down, and shoots the underhand layup. But that was just to be cool.
He probably didn't have to switch hands that time.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah.
A spectacular move.
All right. Well, we talked about the Air Jordan 1, and I think it's your favorite shoe of all time. And
it's up there. I mean, the 2 still holds a special place in my heart because that was the first Jordan I ever owned.
Yeah. The 3 was the first one I ever owned. But I think this one is the one that, to me, is like, that's kind of the one. Anyway, that's the one, and that's Chapter 7. We are going to be back in a couple of days with Chapter 8. And we're going to try to pump things up a little bit. How's that for a teaser? He's Russ. I'm Lang. You're watching A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers podcast or listening to us on Grind City Media.
If you're looking for even more sneaker culture content, check out The Sneak Fest Show with me, Kelsey Wright Johnson, Sherman, Adam, and Jerry, live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. on Grind City Media YouTube and the brand new Grind City Media app.